Stardew Valley. I've talked about Stardew before, but that was way back before I had a good grasp on what I was doing or how to make a video. I mean, I kinda still don't, but I know I'm a heck of a lot better at it now. So today, I wanted to revisit this topic and put a little more thought and effort into putting forth my ideas. After all, this is a gem of a game that deserves every bit of recognition it's gotten, and it also deserves at least that much from me. Hello, and welcome to the channel. I'm Lexicon, and today we're going to be redesigning 3 of Stardew's marriage candidates, Abigail, Sebastian, and Sam. I'll go ahead and put a disclaimer here for those who might be offended that this exists. I am in no way putting down the original writing, character design, or game design. I couldn't do what Mr. Baroni does, and the sheer amount of work that went into, and still continues to go into this game is monumental. I also understand that I know nothing about game design, and some of the things I bring up might not be feasible in the current engine, code, or style. I'm going to be putting aside all of that, and imagining an ideal world in which anything can be done within reason, simply for funsies, and so that I can take something I like and expand on it for entertainment purposes. So, let's get into the dating mechanics of Stardew, and where some fans might find it a little bare. Stardew's dating mechanics are, well, sort of dry to me. It's got all the basics there, don't get me wrong, but each of the events feel too short and surface level. The dialogue tends to give you more hints about a personality depth and their personal life, and while that tends to be quite enough for a lot of people to take and run with, I'd prefer a little bit more decisive characterization. Each marriageable NPC has 6 normal heart events. These events don't tend to take more than a day to complete, barring some of the later ones. They go for a few lines of dialogue within a single scene and then end. They also always end up implying that the NPC has feelings for you, whether you have shown interest in them or not, and you don't get a choice in how to approach them besides your short dialogue responses. You are locked at 8 hearts with marriageable candidates until you have given them a bouquet and started a romantic relationship, unlike with regular NPCs, who have no barrier to full friendship. So let me just stop here for a second and address that. As a complete arrow ace myself, while I enjoy romance and fiction, I do not love the implication that you can't be super close to someone without being romantically involved with them. While I understand that none of these characters are meant to be asexual or aromantic, and are likely not interested in a queer platonic relationship, except for my forever pal Krobus, my sweet boy, I still think it's a little odd that you can be at 10 hearts with Mayor Lewis, but not Sam, Abigail, or Sebastian without dating them. I think an appropriately deep platonic relationship should be possible, and character growth should not be locked behind romance. I had a whole 40-minute dissection video made, and even mostly edited about every single heart of it, but I realized way too far in that it was going to be a slog to get through for you guys just as much as it was for me to edit. While I do want there to be several options for each conversation, getting into the nitty-gritty gets, well, tedious, believe me. So I'll just be giving an overview of their overall story while I work. Sebi is, as I've said before, my favorite of the marriageables. He's got a lot of silly little angsty emo teen vibes, and he likes frogs and video games and fake D&D, so of course I like him. His concept, like everything I tend to pick apart, is super fun. He's just, well, I mean, here, look at his sprite. He's so plain to apparently be a 20-something in his emo teen phase. This man makes his own money, and you're telling me he doesn't order stuff off Hot Topic sometimes? I mean, come on. So the first thing I wanted to do was change up his design. He's got the color palette and the dark spiky hair, but I think we could go with some of the accessories. So while I doodle this guy here for a bit, I want to talk about what makes Sebastian a good character and what I think he lacks. From his Stardew Valley wiki page, Sebastian is a rebellious loner who lives in his parents' basement. He is Maru's older half-brother, and feels like his sister gets all the attention and adoration while he is left to rot in the dark. He tends to get deeply absorbed in his work, computer games, comic books, sci-fi novels, and will sometimes spend great lengths of time pursuing these hobbies alone in his room. He can be a bit unfriendly to people he doesn't know. Could a charming new farmer cultivate the wasteland of his heart? Who knows? So, as you can tell, Sebastian is supposed to have a lot of family drama. However, none of his events seem to revolve around his family. You just get hints. Everything is a hint. Stardew's worst sin, I feel, is that it never quite goes in hard enough with all the traits that should be giving its characters their depth. Most of the time, you just kind of walk up to Sebastian doing his thing and stand there observing. You get one line of input, and that's it. He doesn't explain much of anything, and if he does, it's like 3 lines at most. It's like playing a puzzle game. I feel that there should just be more events in the game, more types of events, more. Besides that, he needs a lot more dialogue revolving around his family, perhaps dialogue that only comes up once per save, so it feels like you're really getting important information. Anyway, we never even see how he gets along with Maru or Demetrius. We really just get a glimpse of how he interacts with Robin, and it's just that, a glimpse. We see that Robin doesn't take his job seriously, at least through Sebastian's perspective, and that's it. They never butt heads, they never actually fight. Am I the only one who kind of wishes we got more drama in this small town of eccentric characters? I guess the best way to explain it is that we just get too little. I don't want to change much per se, but expand. So let's talk about Sebastian and his family first before we get to the farmer. Sebastian definitely favors Robin out of his 3 family members. She's his birth mother, after all, and she's been there since he was a baby. He still remembers his other dad just a little bit, but not enough to remember why they split. He doesn't ask her, and Robin doesn't divulge that information. See, I feel like Sebastian desperately wants Robin's approval. He was probably one of those really bright, smiley kids who was super close to his mom after her divorce, and they grew really close. But that didn't bode well for when she married again and they had a kid, and Sebastian started to feel like maybe he wasn't such a favorite anymore. It's always hard for an only child to become a new sibling, but one from a completely different guy? A different guy who doesn't seem to like him very much? Sebastian tried to make the most of it as he grew up, but it was hard. Eventually, since he started taking interest in a lot of coding and quiet hobbies, his parents asked if he wouldn't mind moving to the basement, so Maru could have his old room while she was getting big enough to stay on her own. Being a people pleaser, Sebastian said yes, but he would later come to believe that this was just another bit of proof that his parents wanted to shove him out and give everything he once had to Maru. They grew up with a sort of strained relationship after that. Maru was a bright, intelligent young girl who took a keen interest in the sciences with her dad, and again, Sebastian felt like he was being left in the dark, literally. He was making leaps and bounds and making money from his freelancing, but Maru's hobby was something Demetrius understood. Robin didn't get coding, and Demetrius certainly didn't care to pay any attention to it, especially since Sebastian was so snappy and cold to him all the time. He was making just as much progress, growing just as smart, except he had to do it all on his own, and Maru got patted on the back for everything she did. Her passion was a visual one, easily shareable, respected. His put him in a dark basement all hours of the day. And the longer he spent down there, the more he started to resent Maru and his parents. As kids, they probably had a pretty rocky relationship. As adults, Sebastian understands that none of it was Maru's fault, and she's grown into a good person, who honestly wishes they had more of a connection, but he just can't move past everything that was done to him for her sake. He's nice to her, as nice as a brother can be, but they were never close. They just couldn't be. Robin is consumed by guilt by the way things have gone. She divorced her previous husband to give Sebastian a good life, to shield him from all the things he would have done, and she thought Demetrius would be a good alternative. And Demetrius is a good father, but to his little girl, his child, not the one he didn't raise. Any attempt to be civil would only have ended in Sebastian being angry with him anyway, so they came to a mutual understanding over the years and left it at that. Robin feels awful for the way Sebastian lives, but she struggles so hard to relate to him now that it feels useless. She still treats him like a teenager sometimes, not an adult, and babies him just a little bit in an attempt to make up for it all. Nothing helps, though. Sebastian spends most of his time in his room, and sometimes he has friends over, but Sam and Abigail can be a lot, so for a good majority of his life, he's just alone, plugging away at what he hopes can help him escape Pelican Town and move somewhere fresh and new, where he'll never have to be stuffed into a basement again. Enter the farmer. When you first meet Sebastian, he's as cold as you would expect. He doesn't really have an interest in most people since they don't show a whole lot of positive interest in him, and he's too busy working most of the time to have more friends than he already does. Besides, you're a farmer, he says. You're like his mom. You work with your hands and you grow things for people to eat. People care about what you do. Go talk to them. If you continue talking to him for a while, at one heart he softens up just a bit. He admits that you're not that terrible actually, you're kind of cool. For a farmer. He apologizes for being so mean at first and says you do a lot of good work for the valley. The two of you get along alright. It's nothing special, and you can tell he's holding his cards close to his chest. When you visit Robin after the first few times, you might get an event where you see her telling him he needs to get out and meet more people, and he says something along the lines of he knows everyone in the valley already and there's no use in getting his hopes up. Bit by bit, his story is revealed in daily dialogues that read a little less like small talk and more like deep conversation, as you slowly climb the friendship ladder with Sebastian. Maybe one day he opens up to you about how he feels about Maru, another day he tells you he didn't choose to live in the basement and he wishes his parents could understand his newest breakthrough. Robin tells you one day why Sebastian's father isn't in the picture. Maru says Sebastian was never nice to her, and she always used to wonder why he was so mad and sad all the time as a kid. Through building a relationship with everyone, you unlock bits and pieces in some more random events involving the family, until finally it all comes together and shows you a picture of how they get along. By the time you get to Sebastian's final heart event, the one where you take a motorcycle ride out to the cliff top overlooking Zuzu City, he's able to admit that it's been so healing to have someone he can talk to about this kind of stuff. He's learned to trust people again. And whether you chose to keep their relationship platonic or romantic, you get to see Sebastian really bloom as a person and grow to love the valley around him, and maybe even try to make up with Maru and his mom. I don't think he'd ever really get along with Demetrius, but that's okay in the end. He doesn't need to in order to be happy, and a good relationship between the two of them would honestly just be forced. For his visual design, I tried to keep the core aspects of his appearance, since they were a good starting point. I kept his spiky emo haircut and purple hoodie, but layered his outfit with a few more emo-ish details, like these purple streaks and striped sleeves to go under his distressed hoodie. I also gave him a little Yoba necklace, not because I think he'd be religious, in fact, probably the opposite, but because emo and goth tends to incorporate a lot of Christian imagery in real life, and that would be the equivalent in Stardew, I guess. It's pretty hard to see, but I also gave him a little frog pin on his hoodie with a taped over mouth. I like to think he and Abigail go shopping together sometimes, and that she likes to help him with dyeing his hair. It was originally going to be a thing they did together, but, well, you know, Abigail just doesn't have to dye her hair anymore. So, there's Sebastian. Would you be friends with him? I have to admit that I don't particularly like a lot of the female marriageable candidates. And that's odd coming from me because it tends to be the opposite way around. I almost always connect with much more with the female characters and overlook the male ones. But in Stardew, for some reason, I just never could get a good feel for any of them. Heck, I kept forgetting Leah existed for the longest time. Abigail is, of course, my favorite of them simply by virtue of the fact that she's supposed to be sort of alt. I mean, just look at me, I'm pretty biased. And the fact that she's implied to be magical. She can talk to Junimos, her hair just magically stays purple, and she's heavily hinted to be the illegitimate child of the wizard, rather than her functioning dad Pierre. She's got a lot of family drama too, and that makes her and Sebastian kind of similar. I know the game sets them up to be kind of low-key crushing on each other, but I propose that they have something more of a sibling relationship. It would let them have more, well, interaction without posing any sort of threat to a potential relationship with the player, and, well, the player's will is law in these lands. I really like Abigail, but just like Sebi and a lot of these characters, her design is just a bit lacking. A little flat. So I found a couple reference images for some more witch-inspired gothic fashion that she could reasonably wear in a small town. While I work on that, let's talk about Abigail and her family drama. Abigail is shown to be a sort of rebellious type. She doesn't get along well with her father. Am I sensing a pattern here? And her mother's just sort of passive. Like her character description says she fights with her mother, and Caroline expresses that she wishes Abigail's hobbies and interests were different, or that she would dress differently. But Pierre is the only one we actually see having a bad interaction with her. Still, from what we know, the two of them are a very conservative couple and try to force their ways onto their daughter. There's a lot of tension between all of them, and even after you start to learn that Abigail might not be Pierre's daughter in the first place, there's never any real conclusion to that. I'd want there to be more to it. Surprising, I know. So when you first meet Abigail, maybe her family seems very warm and sweet and put together, the way small-town country families want to look, despite their clear difference in appearances. Then after a while, you start to walk in on family arguments. Maybe Pierre is telling her off for dressing so scandalously. Maybe Caroline is saying she needs to spend more time helping her tend to the house so she'll make a good wife one day. Maybe you find Abigail playing video games in her room and pretending one of the enemies is her dad. You just get these little snippets that tell you the family isn't as put together as it looks. Whereas Sebastian is clearly in a pit of emotional distress and is part of a broken family, Abigail is pressured and prodded into making everything seem okay on the surface. Eventually you start to find her in the woods, and you get events where she's playing the flute for Junimos, or practicing with her sword, or even trying to do magic. Talking to her during events like these get you more information. She has to do this alone so she doesn't garner attention. Her mother tells her to stop trying to do magic and she doesn't understand why, and she's shocked someone else in the valley can see the Junimos like she can. If you see enough of this, eventually she tells you that she so often wondered who lives in that big tower in Cindersap Forest, and that she wants to go there. One day when you visit the wizard, you walk in to find Abigail there. She seems surprised to see you, but explains that she started learning magic and invites you to come see. She tries an experiment and it goes terribly wrong, but the wizard just seems happy that she's come to make her attempts. It takes time, after all. Eventually, she gets good at it, and you have a heart event where she does a magic trick and makes one of your crops grow. She says she finally feels like she belongs somewhere, and you ask if she intends to tell her parents. She waffles back and forth for a bit, then says yes, she probably should. After all, if they saw what she can do, they'd surely loosen up and admit that this is what she's meant for, right? The two of you have a long chat, and she says it's been really nice to have someone that she can talk to about all the weird and wacky things that go on in her life. She says Sebastian is a really good friend to her, but she can't seem to drag him out of his depressed hole well enough to have any emotional support from him. She says you mean a lot to her, and that she's grateful you've been there to help her deal with her family problems. Her next event is walking into the middle of a big falling out between her family and Abigail. Pierre says she shouldn't be meddling in that kind of thing, and that he's going to confiscate her sword and flute. Abigail says she's an adult now and can do whatever she wants, and he has no right to take her property. Pierre, of course, says that while she's under his roof, she follows his rules, and that means being a lady. Caroline eventually opens up, stressed from the fighting, and admits that Abigail isn't his daughter but the wizard's. At this point, you get the option to come in and concur that Abigail's real calling is where she's been drawn to all this time, not being someone's housewife. Angered, Pierre tells you to get out, and you're kicked out of the shop into the night, after which you're not allowed back in. From that point on, Abigail would live in the wizard's tower. You could also see her in the mines sometimes, and you still get the event where she kills a monster to protect you. This seems to be a good ending for her on a platonic route, but if you chose to be a romantic partner to her, you can marry her from here. The wizard will be delighted, and will tell you to take good care of her, to which Abigail says she'll be the one taking care of you. Oh, and also she does canonically eat rocks now. Maybe she gets magic from eating them, I don't know, but I like to think she'd try to give you amethyst for breakfast sometimes. For her visual design, I kept the color scheme for the most part, and little else. Her hair has been transformed into a wolf cut, and while her outfit isn't the most hardcore goth, it does have a certain witchy aspect, especially with the long swoopy sleeves and amethyst accessories. I also gave her a somewhat stockier build because while most people don't really connect a fuller body with strength, a lot of strong folk have a good amount of chub on them. She doesn't work down her cut, she just does what she wants and eats what she wants, and I think that works out for her design in the end too. Plus, I don't really need an excuse to make a chubby character. or make the silhouettes a little more diverse either. It just felt natural for Abigail. So, there she is. What do you think? Best girl or no? Picking my third character was kind of a challenge. Nobody else really thematically goes with Sebby and Abby except for maybe Shane, but I still feel like they're not similar enough to go all in the same video. Instead, I went with Sam, who seems to be a part of their little friend group. He sticks out from his two buddies and really everyone else in the valley. He looks like a golden retriever who made friends with two black cats. That being said, I really hate his design. And I know I'm not alone in that. I mean, just look at his Super Saiyan hair, Sonic the Hedgehog looking weirdo. Now, I was never a huge fan of Sam, if you couldn't tell. He just seemed a bit plain. And as I just mentioned, his hair's a real character design turnoff. So I probably ended up changing him the most drastically out of the three, and while he ended up a whole different character, I think it fits my vision for him fairly well. I thought his personality fit a sort of light kidcore aesthetic, along with a few details from a skater boy kind of look. So with that in mind, let me draw for a little bit while I tell you more about my ideas for him. So, Sam is kind of a sad case. He's clearly grown, seeing as you can, marry him, but he's usually portrayed as a younger teenager. Still, in one of his events, he has to take on the responsible big brother role, and you can see a lot of surprising maturity and guilt behind trying to think of what to tell his brother. He has to be the adult in this situation, since Jody is always busy, and he seems to really try to take care of Vincent. I think it might be interesting to go deeper into this and say that Sam grew up having to do a lot of the entertaining and basic watching out for Vincent with their mom busy all the time, and their dad being distant either emotionally or physically depending if he's off to do military work at the time. He's grown up having to be responsible, and when he gets the chance, he likes to indulge in childlike interests or try to express his own childhood a little bit too late. He loses his responsible edge and does things like skateboard around places he shouldn't, meaning risky tricks, occasionally makes a mess of other people's property without meaning to, and tries to set up a band. He only works part-time, partially because he feels robbed of his childhood and life already, and wants to have at least some of his life to himself. Relatable. It's pretty obvious from the get-go that his family values each other a lot, but there's a sizable amount of stress on them purely through circumstance. Jody's busy and lonely, Sam's dealing with his stuff, and Vincent's growing up without a dad or enough parental attention. They love each other, of course, but they don't all connect, and especially since Jody's under so much stress and trying to hide it, she can sometimes be a little snappy when they cause a mess or cause trouble. Sam tends to keep to his room a lot when he's home, especially when he's making music, since the loud noise tends to be disruptive. You can gain a little bit of insight as to how they work by making friends with Vincent and Jody as well, who will tell you with their respective perspectives. Hey, that was fun to say. That Sam spends a lot of time with Vincent and that Jody is really grateful to him for stepping up to the plate in their dad's absence. Jody says she's really sorry she can't do more for the kids, but it takes a lot out of her for Kent to be gone all the time and at risk of losing his life. She also has to run the house by herself, and since neither of the boys are great about helping out with chores, she has to do all the cooking. Sam will tell you that he loves his mom and brother, but that he really wishes his dad hadn't gone to war and had a normal job instead. He says he's proud of his dad, but he doesn't know if it was worth leaving his family behind like this. He'll then apologize and say that's a pretty selfish thing to think. Over time, you start to see him more around town doing things with his friends, playing Solarian Chronicles or jamming out with Sebastian, hanging out with Abigail doing all sorts of things, skateboarding in places he shouldn't, or playing loud music that gets Alex's grandparents to file a complaint with Mayor Lewis about the noise. You get the option to tell Lewis to either back off and let him play, or tell Sam that he should be a bit mindful of others' peace and quiet. Either way, he tells you that it sucks having to be quiet all the time, and sometimes he just wants to make noise and be irresponsible. You start to realize through little interactions in some events that Sam is a responsible and brotherly person, especially where Vincent is concerned. He helps Penny out with the kids a lot, plays tag with them, and even participates in the egg hunt along with Abigail and the two little ones without going too hard on any of them. He helps people in need and has a surprisingly level head on his shoulders, but still, he keeps his childish habits and sometimes gets in the way of the adults around him who thinks he should be a bit more mature. Eventually, once you start to grow closer, he asks you what you think of that and whether you agree that he should just drop it and grow up. You tell him that he should do what makes him happy, and he seems satisfied with that. He says you're probably the smartest person he knows, and if you think so, then it's probably true. He lists all the things that make him happy, and shyly, at the very end, he includes you. If you're platonic only with him, he still says this, but if you chose to be romantic with him instead, this is when you get the chance to marry him. If you do, I imagine his room would be decked out in bright colors and musical instruments, and his friends might come over sometimes during the day to play music outside by the shipping box. He'll give you fun food like pizza and sweets and call it breakfast. And when you have kids, he'll be ecstatic to raise them with you, saying it'll be good to raise your kids with both parents around. For his visual design, like I said, I wanted to go with a vaguely kidcore inspired look. He's a bit disheveled and doesn't really look like he knows how to dress himself, and his clothes are a mix of all sorts of bright primary colors. Instead of his Super Saiyan hair, I gave him a long, messy mullet type look, which gives him a laid back feel. I also included some grown-out brown roots, insinuating that he bleached his hair to look a bit more like his dad's at some point. I also gave him some freckles and a little gap in his teeth to make him look more friendly and kid-like, and I also snuck a pansexual flag there on his shirt. I know all the Stardew people are technically pan since they'll be with you no matter what, but I think it adds a little something. So, there's Sam. What do you think? Is he friend-shaped? Well, there's all three of my Stardew marriage candidate redesigns for now. What did you think? Who's your favorite? Did I absolutely just ruin one of them for you? Please let me know. Just, be polite about it, especially to your fellow commenters. I have no idea how well this video is going to do, but I really hope it does well, because I'd like to try some more Stardew characters after this. It's also just really nice to return to long-form content at some point, because I feel like this is where I really shine and get to have fun, though the view count does seem to disagree. So, well, cast your vote with a comment, like, and share, and tell me who you'd want to see next. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I've been Lexicon, and I'll see you next time.